Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you as always from that CHEK News World Headquarters in Victoria. A week dominated by the debate over climate change. How do we fight it? How do we afford to fight it? What should we be doing to tackle it? All the parties weighing in, plus municipalities pushing back on homeless legislation and the ever-expanding speculation tax. So a lot to get into. We will bring in the pod squad, Jeff Ferrier and Jillian Oliver here. Ali is off this week, but we are going to dive right in to climate change politics. BC United and the BC Conservatives unveiling their climate plans this week. Both call for essentially the elimination of the NDP's climate plan, which we'll just quickly recap so you know what they're calling to get rid of. A 40% reduction in greenhouse gas levels by 2030. Right now we're only at a 3% reduction. All electric vehicle sales by 2035, a net zero economy by 2050, pollution caps, tripling the carbon tax, and a big push to get everyone on hydroelectricity. So that's the NDP's plan. The Conservative and United plans are different. They call for essentially getting rid of some of those things and refocusing in areas of water conservation and liquefied natural gas. Jillian, what do we make of the two opposition plans, and what does that mean for the NDP's Clean BC plan?
Well, I think it's a stretch to call both of these things climate plans. They're really just a series of short bullet points with very little detail, whereas Clean BC is a very extensive, very technical plan of how to transition the economy to fight climate change. And stop or slow down some of the horrible effects that we're experiencing year after year, as well as to spur innovation in the clean economy and transition the economy as, that's the direction that the world's heading as everybody else gets off fossil fuels. There's some stuff that the NDP is already doing, like in Kevin Falcon's plan to invest more in climate resilient infrastructure. That's a good idea. But again, province is already looking at that, and we're also looking at that from the federal government. He also wants to go all in on LNG, which, the NDP has already approved quite a bit of LNG, have frameworks for doing that, have offered lots of subsidies to that industry to expand fracking and fossil fuel production. But they've also put in some measures to test that against the climate plan for future development. That still kind of remains to be seen if that's going to slow down more development. But Falcon wants to go all in. He's saying that will reduce emissions globally. But again, super dubious claim. There's lots of emerging research that shows that the methane emissions from fracking are worse than CO2. So, I think that's not really, it does not amount to a climate plan. It certainly doesn't amount to a climate plan to meet BC's emissions. Rust adds, even worse, makes very little sense, wants to go all in on nuclear, scrap every, electric vehicle subsidy, which has really driven a ton of adoption and has helped people, with the affordability of that. So it's I don't know what else to say. These are not really climate plans. I think, they can call them that, but I don't think anyone else should.
Mm-hmm. They're mostly, Jeff, I agree with Jillian, they're mostly just plans to eliminate most of the NDP's climate plan. But, it is reaching a certain constituency of people who clearly the parties think are going to support this. What do you make of it?
Yeah, no, this is more politics than policy. We're 330 days away from the next provincial election, and as you would expect, the different political parties are starting to position themselves ahead of that to make themselves as appealing as they can be to voters. What we're seeing from the BCU and BC Conservatives is that they're going to go all in on affordability. They think that focusing on affordability of daily life is so big and so pressing an issue that folks are going to pay short shrift to secondary issues like climate change. So that's the finish line for me being fair and nice because Ali's not here to defend these announcements here today. My takeaway from this week is that John Restad is living in Kevin Falcon's head, and now he's ghostwriting BCUP's policy and on climate. You know, it's not lost on me and not lost on a lot of folks that last August, John Restad calculated that there's political advantage for him in fighting climate action. He got booted from the BC Liberals because of this. And now, a year later, his former party is climate change copycat of the Conservatives. And so you have two parties now in the lead up to an election fighting each other over who's going to do less to address climate change. There's a constituency for this kind of positioning, absolutely. I would hope that in this day and age when climate change is real, it is happening. We're seeing the disastrous effects of it here in British Columbia in floods and wildfires and heat domes, that voters demand from all of the parties serious climate plan and not just empty slogans that are about winning votes instead of actually tackling the problem that's at our feet.
That through line there, Jeff, you touched on it, and about affordability really being actually the main driver in the United and Conservative plans. They're saying that these policies the NDP have aren't affordable during an affordability crisis where people are getting hit by interest rates and grocery prices and all of that. And I think it has taken off since the Prime Minister announced that carbon tax exemption on home heating oil in Atlantic Canada. And now everyone is beating up on the carbon tax, and the NDP are feeling that pressure. There was a leaked memo from an advisor to the Energy Minister, Josie Osborne, this week suggesting the NDP are considering using carbon tax revenue to freeze hydro rates or provide rebates and brand it as affordability under the Clean BC climate plan. So that direct linkage, which I think indicates maybe the NDP are feeling that pressure from people who are saying, I can't afford to buy groceries. Can I afford extra costs to fight climate change? Jillian, that pressure, that collision between the affordability part and the political calculus that the parties are using to say maybe people think that's more important than climate change in the opposition realm. What does that mean for the discussion? And then what does it mean for the NDP trying to hold their position?
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think that the NDP have been this has been top of mind for them ever since we've started to see that sort of movement at the federal level, as the federal government starts to feel the heat from the federal Conservatives. You know, I think politically the BC NDP are in a very, very different position than the Prime Minister. Very popular, much higher vote intention for climate and environmental issues in BC than in some of the rest of the country. We've had climate policies and the carbon tax much longer, much more comfort with it, I think. But affordability, no question, is the number one issue for people. And I think they're smart to try to get ahead of it right now, while they have, you know, the time and the ability to maneuver on those issues. And I think a mistake that a lot of progressive governments make is not getting ahead of their policies, thinking that the good effects of them will just trickle down and people will recognize them. They need to continue to sell those. You know, you hear that from past administrations, like Obama era staffers talked a lot about that, why they lost control of Congress midway through their term, as they sort of just thought people would feel the effects of their policies. But you need to continue to sell them. And I think that's what the NDP is looking at. And I think that's really prudent. I think that people, you know, the costs of climate change are really clear. Like the entire population of Yellowknife had to be evacuated this summer. Lots and lots of homes burned down in BC. I think people understand that this is where we need to go and that it makes good economic sense to do so, especially, you know, the International Energy Agency says that fossil fuel demand is going to peak in just 5 years from now. All of these things make good economic sense, but the government needs to sell it. I think they're recognizing that's what the federal government failed to do, and they're, you know, trying to make sure they get ahead of that before it gets ahead of them.
Yeah, 100%, Jeff. And it kind of leads to this sort of difficulty in a government, you know, people worried about right now versus worried about next summer or the future, and that difficulty of their pocketbook politics right now versus the bigger fight for climate change, and also maybe even a rural-urban divide on this issue depending on, how you work and where you work and how you heat your home and what's cheaper to heat your home and how much gas you're using and that type of thing. Those are complicated factors for the NDP if they want to just kind of continue to hold the climate plan without, as Jillian mentioned, finding a better way to explain the benefits during the affordability crisis.
Yeah, sure. And the communication side of this is very muddled right now. We don't talk about how British Columbians get climate Clean BC rebates in the mail to offset what they pay in a carbon tax, and what doesn't go into those rebates, which are going up as the carbon tax goes up, is going into investment into the kinds of things that will make us more resilient to climate disaster or prevent emissions, transit being one of them. I think there's also, government needs to punch harder, and you're starting to see signs of it punching harder on the fact that the clean tech route is the way to prosperity. There's this sense of Clean BC is about no jobs. Well, actually, the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act is expected to spur $3 trillion in investments in clean techs and renewables. And that's according to noted socialists at Goldman Sachs. So EB has BC at the front of the line. We've had a $1 billion investment decision in a battery plant in Maple Ridge, 450 jobs there. And if you look at our economy right now, affordability is a challenge. Absolutely. Inflation is a challenge. Absolutely. Cost of living. Yes. But our population is growing. Our job numbers are up. Wages and earnings are up. GDP growth is up. Foreign direct investment in British Columbia is at the highest that it's ever been. The only numbers that are down, if you look at BC's economic dashboard, is personal bankruptcies. So I would say that affordability, there are measures the government has to take, but this narrative that getting to the front of the line on the changing economy and setting BC up for success is a mistake, which is what we're hearing from the opposition parties, is wrong, and government needs to be clearer and sharper and talking about the opportunities that are here for us now and forward, and less defensive.
Yeah. And not that I want to do this rant again, but I will link it back to something I've said previously, where I think there's a little bit of chickens coming home to roost for the NDP here on their sort of unimpressive affordability measures, their paltry rebates administered through the federal government, so you don't even know you're getting them from BC, income tested to the lowest income British Columbians, so the middle class aren't seeing that meaningful government aid. And I think the poor job the NDP's done on that is making it harder for them to fight back critics on the climate plan, because we are in an affordability crisis. And I think New Democrats are going to have to do a better job targeting some middle-income voters that they think on paper are too rich for help. And I've said that before, or they're going to get hammered by they're going to cede the playing field on affordability, and it's going to hurt their climate plan by everyone else trying to play to the pocketbook. So yeah, that's my rant.
I always appreciate your rant, and you have made it before, and it is always an interesting and relevant point. I would point out that the big danger for government, the trap that it wants to avoid, and to everyone who cares about climate to avoid, is making climate change and climate plans the boogeyman for affordability. And we're about to talk about this, I think. The reason why we are having affordability issues in this province it's housing. It's housing. It's not the carbon tax. It's housing.
Jillian, just to close it off here, we haven't talked about the Greens, and I just want to open that up. They have a more ambitious than anyone else, climate plan. Does this fight on the other side to roll it back give them any room in the electorate's mind to sort of maneuver?
Well, it puts the issue on the table, and I think, at the forefront of the discussion, which I think helps them, because otherwise they're kind of out there on their own trying to push that. It gives them the opportunity to kind of highlight to some of those more like, hardline climate voters, more progressive voters, that the NDP still are subsidizing fracking, they're still expanding fossil fuels, and that we've made really slow progress towards meeting our targets, even though we have seen that small 3% reduction. But at the same time, I think it's the sort of political spectrum is more stretched with the Conservatives being so far out and taking up more oxygen. So some opportunities for them to talk more about it, but also, I think some challenges there as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll keep on top of that because, certainly like I said, the toothpaste is out of the tube with the Prime Minister fiddling with the carbon tax, and now everybody is taking a shot at it for political gain. So, but let's move on to another topic here, the speculation tax and the housing sector. That old speculation tax from 2018, it's kind of like the Kirby of BC politics, just keeps eating up stuff and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. 13 new municipalities swallowed in to the speculation tax this week, meaning people who own second homes, cottages, vacation rentals, you need to rent them out to a tenant at least 6 months of the year, or you get hit with a vacancy tax essentially on the assessed value of your property. So Kamloops, Parksville, Qualicum, Courtenay, Comox, Penticton, Vernon, Lake Country, and more added to this. Now, I want to go around on it. The finance minister is saying, hey, nobody's forced to take the speculation tax. We've been talking to everyone. They want this. Then she gets blasted by communities like Penticton saying, well, we don't want it. And Parksville saying, well, we weren't even asked. Like, we're fine to take it, but you didn't talk to us, so that's not cool. So that's interesting. But then also the framing of this, I noticed, homes are for people, not wealthy investors, is the overarching blanket that the NDP are putting on everything on this. So what does that mean? And are the people paying this speculation tax, who are mostly British Columbians in terms of volume of people, do they consider themselves real estate investors and speculators, and are they going to appreciate the expansion of this tax? Jeff, I'll start with you.
Oh, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of people who aren't going to appreciate the expansion of the tax, but I expect there'll be a whole bunch of people who do. And the people who do are people who can't find affordable housing in British Columbia at this time. And the government, as we've seen in the last few weeks, is moving heaven and earth to do everything that it can to make more housing available to those folks. So there will be local governments who push back. There'll be people who own second homes and don't rent them out who might push back. You don't pay a speculation tax if you rent out your second place. Remember that. So it's not like it's automatic. And I'm seeing a lot of, one of the things I'm finding interesting, and it's understandable, and after the government has done all these things, multiplexes, transit-oriented development, there's a lot of folks who are saying, well, but won't transit-oriented development lead to, redevelopment of some rental housing? And won't creating multiplexes create more wealth for the person who owns the place? It kind of, remember when Bart Simpson got a guitar and he quit because instead of being Jeff Beck, he was Polly Wally Crappy? I still remember Homer's wise words then, because I hear the echoes in the words of folks pushing back on some of these initiatives, whether it's speculation tax or transit-oriented development. It goes, something's hard to do, and it's not worth doing. You just stick that guitar, or in this case, BC's Housing Action, in the closet next to your shortwave radio, karate outfit, and your unicycle, and we'll go inside and watch TV. Yeah. Right. Like what the government's doing is going to bring issues, but the solution here isn't to stop what you're doing. It's not to quit. We've had governments quit on housing for the last 50 years. Fix the problems as they come up and keep moving forward. Make as many houses available as you can for people. We're in a crisis. We need to get on with doing it.
But I think the issue with the speculation tax is at some point, we asked the finance minister, why don't you just put it in the whole province, right? If it's such a benefit, just expand it out. And her answer back is it doesn't work in the whole province. There's a part of British Columbia, tourism-dependent, Whistler, the Gulf Islands, where the province realizes this tax doesn't work. So they seem to be incrementally moving towards it. Parksville is a tourism area. They have some concerns. But the tax doesn't work everywhere. And so, Jillian, I kind of find it interesting that how powerful the framing of this is. Homes are for people, not investors, is kind of used as a blanket right now to go over all of the NDP's housing moves and kind of smother any criticism that might be valid on the kind of details of how it might work, because the messaging is just so well done.
Yeah, it's a powerful slogan, and political communication these days is all about clarity and simplicity because there's so much noise to break through right now and attention spans are so short. I think on this one, it certainly does open them up to potential accusations of hypocrisy or inaccuracy. Maybe less so with the speculation tax. I think that's, the NDP has already kind of weathered an initial storm on this tax when they first implemented it. Lots of communities like Kelowna and West Kelowna that were against it, where they pushed it through, didn't pay any political consequences. People broadly support the tax. But on some of the rezoning stuff that Green MLA Adam Olsen has been raising in the House, talking about how this could potentially exacerbate inequality between people who already own homes, who stand to profit. I think some of that's really interesting because, basically there needs to be a profit incentive if the government is going to be relying on the private market to provide the investment to build these new homes. There are potentially some alternatives, but they're quite extreme measures. That would either have to be some sort of like profit or price cap on new developments, which would probably, end private sector investment or at least really, put a damper on it, or the government, building those homes and financing them themselves, which, we might be looking at a program like that down the road. But that's, the scale of that is so significant. It's hard to imagine that taking, full responsibility for the sheer volume of homes that we need. But I think that as we start to see these policies come into effect, we'll start to see things like, concrete examples of single family homes, how much profit they sold for, all the money that's flowing to developers and to people who've already made millions of dollars in the housing market. And I think those sorts of concrete examples being heard by people who, are seeing all this development happen and seeing house prices probably still continue to rise, and not even house prices, like a small duplex or whatever is going to come out of this development. And I think that might lead to some discontent with the policies and to the government's performance as they come into effect, for sure.
Okay, great discussion. Thank you both for being here. Thank you for listening and watching us. Make sure you subscribe to the audio podcast. We got lots of extra discussion today on our topics. We'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.